The following program is brought to you in part by the film Backdoor Channels, The Price of Peace.
Clyde Haberman, great writer, New York Times, used to be in the Middle East and other countries, now writes a column on New York City. By the way, how's New York doing, Clyde?
New York's doing very well. Very well.
People in real estate love Giuliani, I can tell you that.
Real estate, I think a lot of other people, I mean, God, here we go, famous predictions that go wrong. But I mean, conventional wisdom strikes me as making sense that he's going to be very, very hard to beat. It's not to say he can't be beaten, but I mean, last week, two stories in tandem. One, he has $800 million more to play around with than he originally thought, and the surplus is huge. And crime was down by 28% yet again, yet another 28% over last year, which was already down before. How do you argue against that? Those are the two big issues. I'm not saying there aren't other issues that he's vulnerable on, including his own personality, but it's not going to be enough.
There was a fellow in my office today who lives in Midwood, and he's an Orthodox Jew. Yeah. And he said, it's so wonderful to live in Midwood today. He says there are ads in the synagogues now to vote for Giuliani. Why? Already? He's got policemen on horseback. Which they haven't seen in 20 years, and they're friendly, and the kids love them.
Good.
He says
I thought Jews didn't like uniforms on horses. Reminds them of Cossacks.
So far, this guy did well with them. Maybe it's an exception to the rule. What about this UN business with the traffickeering? You've been into that, haven't you?
Yeah, I was. I'm not an advocate of illegal parking, mind you, but it's hard to escape the feeling that this is a no-brainer campaign issue. I'm not saying that people are going to vote for Giuliani because of this. That's silly, but it can't hurt. These figures are rather interesting. 2 years ago, 2 years ago, meaning 1994, comparing to 2 years later, 96. In 94, there were 68,000 tickets given to the diplomatic community in New York. And by 96, it had skyrocketed to 134,000, virtually double. What are you going to conclude? What are we to conclude from this? That the diplomats suddenly ran crazy looking for every fire hydrant they could to park next to? It doesn't make sense. Clearly, the police and City Hall, I guess, have decided they're going to be targeted. We're not going to put up with this anymore, whatever it is. I know diplomats who have told me, pretty ridiculous stories of picking up 6 tickets for the same offense, just sitting there, cops sort of using the tickets like wallpaper on a wall. I know diplomats who swear that they were parked in correct zones and got tickets anyway. I'm not saying that they're all illegally given these tickets. That's crazy. But when you see numbers like that, when it doubles in just 2 years, it does suggest that a campaign is underway, and it's an easy one because there's nobody in this town who's going to speak up for the diplomats, except maybe me. I mean, they're all seen as arrogant and indifferent to New York and supercilious anyway. And frankly, they're not, although enough of them are that it really is a pain in the neck. But clearly, Mr. Giuliani got his nose out of joint, especially after there was this altercation between the police and a Russian and Belarusian diplomat on the west side. And the mayor is very quick to side with the police, not only because he instinctively sides with the police, which is correct, until proven otherwise, the police should be sided with. But let's face it, the cops don't like him either because he's not giving them a pay raise, and he's proposing that they take 0% of a raise for the past 2 years, so that it's anything he can do to show he's on their side, he will do above and beyond the call of duty, because when it comes to the bread and butter issues of what have you done for me lately in terms of money, the police are not with him at all.
What drives Giuliani, Clyde?
I don't know. I don't know the man.
You don't know, huh?
He's clearly sure of himself. I've never had an interview with him. I've asked for a couple of times and I've never been given one. It's a lot easier to interview the Prime Minister of Israel, I'll tell you that. I don't know. I mean, I'd like to think the best, that he wants to do good for the city, that he has a sense that the city was on the wrong track, not just on the Dinkins. He likes to pick on the Dinkins as though Dinkins invented all evil, but that New York was clearly on the wrong track, and I think he's put it on a right track in many, many ways. I think on balance he's been a good mayor. Where I find him difficult to take is a personality issue of, I am right completely. There is a sense of that in his mind. There's a rigidity
Hubris.
in his hubris. It's a you know, what's that cliche, my way or the highway kind of sense. There is a tendency to assume that if you disagree with him, you're the enemy. It's not just that reasonable people can differ.
Koch said on the show many times.
And I think he's right on that. Now, Ed Koch didn't exactly suffer dissenters kindly either. I covered him at City Hall in his first administration before I became a foreign correspondent. But at least there was a sense of, there is another point of view. I happen to think it's a stupid one, Ed Koch would say. I happen to disagree with it. But at least there is another point of view. With Giuliani, you do get the sense that he does not believe it's possible to disagree with him unless you are hopelessly corrupt, stupid, morally deficient in some way. But the possibility that you simply have a different point of view is unheard of. And another way this comes out for me is the fact that he doesn't take any vacations. Now, this is trumpeted as a great virtue. The mayor is on the job 24 hours a day,
used to be that way.
7 days. Well, it's a mistake. Not just to recharge batteries and all those cliches, but Koch did one thing that was terribly important. When he took a vacation, because he could not sit on a beach and just read a book, that would be a waste of time and he'd get bored. But he traveled. And there's a reason why traveling is considered a broadening experience and why it makes people better people usually, because you do see that there are other ways of viewing life. It's a terrible cliche, but it's such an obvious one that I don't understand why the mayor doesn't abide by it a bit. He has a bit of difficulty, it seems to me, and again, I don't know the man, but just from his public persona, and people, by the way, I know who know him in private say he can be terribly charming, terribly caring, terribly considerate.
I've heard
but
that
this
also.
does not come through in the public persona, which is all I can deal with. The public persona is of a man who has difficulty stepping outside of his own relatively narrow experience, which is also a prosecutorial one, which means he's also used to putting people behind bars and then not having to deal with them anymore for 10 to 20 years. Here, if he has disagreements with people, he has to deal with them the next day in the city council or in the press or wherever. He could use, I think, some time off to go and stick his head into other corners of the planet and see that there are other, life is not so certain.
Probably his wife agrees with you.
Okay.
But that's another subject.
That's another subject, and I don't know anything about that. Really, I don't.
And I don't want to speculate about that one
Neither
either.
do I. I would not. But again, I'm told that in private, actually, his private behavior is much
I know
different from the
Randy
public
Maestro
persona.
very well, and I know his chief of staff, Bruce Teitelbaum, very well, and they all swear that he has a great personality, that he's humorous, that he's very giving and
So
very
I'm told.
caring. Teitelbaum got married about 2-3 weeks ago. He attended the wedding. He waited the whole night there, and to go through one of these near Hasidic weddings is a long draw. He did it with Mario Como at his side, and it was nice. And it's human, but I agree with you that the public persona is absolutely one of a confined, rigid form of life. You're right.
Yeah.
Clyde, you enjoy writing columns? You have freedom to write on anything you want?
Pretty much within New York. I mean, I miss foreign affairs a lot, but I have a UN there occasionally to use that as an excuse to trip into it. I don't do it too often because eyebrows would arch in my office, but I like New York, and I think we discussed this the previous time I was on, and I haven't changed that. The city that I left in 1982 has been greatly improved on over the years in many, many, many ways. I think it is indeed a cleaner, clearly a more secure, more vibrant city in many ways. Again, this is the result of decisions made by several administrations, not just one, but I have no problem if this mayor wants to take full credit, because you get bragging rights when really good things happen on your watch. Surely we'd all be blaming him if it was falling apart. There are obviously worrisome signs, and I'm not saying anything original. Somebody has to get control of the schools and turn them into truly, true education centers, and not custodians of kids for a few hours a day. I do believe they try more than they're given credit for. Whenever I go into public schools, and I do it often enough, not as often as I probably should or would like to, but often enough, I'm always impressed by how hard many teachers try. I think there's a bit of a tendency, again, both at City Hall, but also among the tabloids in the city. This is going to sound very self-serving, because I don't work for a tabloid. I used to, the Post, but there's a tendency to speak kind of sneeringly of public services in the city and the people who use them, as though all people who go to CUNY colleges are idiots, as though all kids and teachers who are in the public school system are either slackers or just plain dummies. It's unfair. I'm not suggesting that these are paradises necessarily, but I've been in schools where it is quite clear people are trying and really working hard to succeed. Do they always? Clearly not. I'm not being Pollyannish about it. But I think we're sometimes too hard on some of the systems of public service than we ought to be.
Another topic, the Middle East, Clyde. You served there for how long?
4 years in Jerusalem, but I was there a fair amount before that I was based in Rome, and Turkey was in my province, and during the Gulf War, and even before it, I would swing, it wound me up in...
Turkey's under some changes right now, too.
Turkey's tremendous changes. This would have been unthinkable as recently as 6 years ago.
You mean that
the government that it now has, the Muslim government that it now has. Now, it's
really only the Prime Minister. I mean, he's a minority party, and Chile made a deal with him.
20%.
Right.
But 20% is not inconsiderable, and the fact that remains that in the very balkanized world of Turkish politics, it was enough for him to be the only person to get the call to form a viable government.
How strong is the army?
Quite strong, and it could step in. I don't think it wants to. As I'm understanding it, I mean, it would really, I think most Turks feel that was behind them. They haven't had the army step in since the early 80s, and before that it was in the early 70s. And I think they'd like to think that is behind them, that they are indeed a Western-style democracy, although they're really not Western fully, and I don't think they'll ever get into the European Union. It's a great hope of many Turks.
Why is that? Why don't?
For a lot of reasons. The ones that will be cited the most officially will be human rights record in Turkey, and the fact that it is still quite poor, even compared to some of the poorer European countries. But bottom line, Europeans are not going to want a 70 million plus Muslim country in their midst. It's as simple as that. It'll be couched in other terms. Again, human rights will be cited, other reasons will be cited, and all of which are legitimate reasons. But bottom line, Christian Europe is already nervous by the vast Muslim presence in its midst, in Paris, in London. Have
you ever met Mrs. Chiller?
No. She actually was not a significant figure, or even any figure, in the years I covered it. I saw her briefly. She visited Israel when I was based in Jerusalem, and she came. She's certainly very impressive. Any Westerner would be impressed by her and feel comforted in a world made nervous by Islamic fundamentalism, by her Western outlook and manner. But she seems to have some corruption problems.
The stigma attached to her right now.
Well, I mean, I don't know the truth or untruth of the allegations, but they're pretty serious allegations. And a lot of Turks are very angry at her, feeling that she's propping up this Islamic Welfare Party prime minister only to save herself from possible indictment and
Lolly Weymouth, one of your colleagues
Right.
at the Washington Post was over there, and we did a show with her about 4 weeks ago. She claims, period, that Chile made the deal to save her skin.
Yeah, that's certainly, I mean, it certainly sounds believable.
It's an important country. Very few people here know. We keep talking about it here. We're going to cut for a commercial break. We'll come back and talk to Clyde about what he thinks is going on in Israel today. And some tough news came out today that the relationship between Jordan and Israel is starting to come apart a little bit because of allegedly water rights. But we'll talk about it.
In modern Middle East history, only one peace treaty has stood the test of time, the 1978 Camp David Accord. In the new documentary film, Backdoor Channels, The Price of Peace, learn the true story behind the greatest diplomatic achievement of our time and its lessons for the future.
The price of peace is very high to have this courageous man and my close friend killed.
Winner of the Telly Award for Best Cultural Program. Now available at select stores including Barnes & Noble and online at Amazon.com. Now get the book the hit movie was based on, Leon Charney's Backdoor Channels. Learn about the backdoor channel negotiations that led to the historic 1978 Israeli-Egyptian peace treaty. Become a witness to history and order Backdoor Channels online at Amazon or Barnes & Noble. Also available at all other retailers and booksellers. Or download the audiobook at iTunes or Audible.com. Relive history. Order Backdoor Channels.
We're back with the brilliant Clyde Haberman of the New York Times. Well, he was educated in the New York Post. Eric Brindell takes some credit for that. Rupert Murdoch, what was Dorothy Schiff?
Long before. Dorothy Schiff. Actually, it turned out Murdoch's first week of owning the Post in '77 was my last week there.
Is that Freudian?
No, that was, I'd already been hired by the Times, but I tell it that way because let people jump to whatever assumptions they want. Actually, I already was gone.
By the way, you told me that you went to the funeral of a very good friend of yours, Murray Kempton.
Yeah.
Would you consider him one of the greats in this?
Oh, without question. I mean, Murray held us to a standard of integrity and just writing skill that few can match. Now, not that every one of Murray's columns was entirely intelligible. I mean, the language was so dense sometimes that you felt you had to approach it with a machete, certain sentences to hack away all the adjectives to find the nouns and the verbs. You knew they were in there somewhere. But when he was on and great, there was nobody more elegant in this manner, and he was not awed by people in power, and he did not accept conventional wisdom, even among his fellow journalists, over who were the good guys and who were the bad guys. And with Murray, the good guys had a way of becoming bad guys and vice versa. So he wrote very fondly and caringly, in many cases, of Richard Nixon out of office, and became very friendly with William Buckley, and had a good relationship with an awful lot of people who politically he abhorred, and with people who, by most slights, were terrible people, you know, mafiosi and so on. So he was an interesting fellow in this regard.
James Wexler, you remember him at the New York Post?
Sure.
Max Lerner?
Didn't know Lerner. I mean, he never worked in the office, so I never...
Were these great columnists, in your opinion?
Well, they were, but, you know...
they were all liberal?
They were all liberal, certainly. I found Murray harder to classify in that regard. They were... the problem with Wexler, as I remember, was that in his... I mean, Wexler's greatness was long before I was on the scene. I was much too young. Was in resisting this McCarthyist tide, which a lot of people, including a lot of modern era conservatives, either forget or try to wave aside as to what a corrosive effect that had on American life and American politics and American freedoms, even, at least the freedom to feel you could speak your mind. And Wexler resisted at a time that was not an easy thing to do. The Wexler I knew and read by the time I was, you know, of either cognizant age or working at the Post, was already in the 60s and certainly was not in his prime at that point. And the same was true of Max Lerner, who I didn't know at all. And they both became very predictable. That's part of the problem with columnists in general in America, is that for the most part, you more or less know going in what position will be taken. There are very few who you really can't be 100% sure of. William Safire, for example, for a long time was. I don't think Bill's is quite as unpredictable as he used to be.
It's pretty predictable.
I think now on some of the major issues, you know, where he's going to stand vis-a-vis Clinton, vis-a-vis Israel,
right.
To name some
Same thing with Rosenthal all of a sudden.
And certainly with Abe Rosenthal, but that wasn't always true. Or Tony Lewis on the left. So, but Safire always stood out for me, and I think many other people. A, because he writes like a charm, but B, because he you couldn't fully classify him.
How about guys like Hamill, Breslin? Are they?
Well, they're not writing columns anymore. Both of them, first Breslin, then Hamill, changed the nature of newspaper columnizing, if you will. Some would say calumnizing, in the sense of having very strong opinions and points of view, but accompanying it with real reporting and being out there.
Street guys.
Every single day. They were street guys. They
right.
spoke with a lot more street smarts than I ever could. I never really, you know, I don't have the same background. And Murray, who was hardly a street guy, worked the streets. I mean, Murray would look at what was on the Associated Press day book every morning and then go out after he'd found something that intrigued him. This beats the hell. I try to emulate that in the sense that virtually every column I do does involve reporting and often going out there. The notion of just sitting back in an office and pontificating is the kiss of death.
Clyde, let's talk about an important subject. Do you know how important, let's say you write a column.
Mm-hmm.
You're in the New York Times, which is the great paper of the United States, maybe the world. Everybody listens to it. It's a Bible, intellectual Bible. You need humility in your job because you know you can turn things. I mean, you write this way, you write that way. Not only you, but people. Now, Sunday morning, you see a bunch of guys from Washington talking and talking heads and just talking. And you and I know that a lot of it is nonsense, but yet the whole America sees this stuff and they're moved by it. They're absolutely moved by it.
I'm sorry, you're probably right. I've discovered this in the year and a half or so I've been back from overseas. It's really extraordinary. I mean, maybe when they're talking about Washington, everything is fine. I don't know Washington at all. Maybe if they're talking about fights between President and Congress, they're dead on. But I've watched in particular, let's say on Israel, just a few weeks ago on one of the big shows on Sunday morning, 3 or 4 of the questions were just based on flat-out errors of fact.
Right.
They were just dead wrong, and the guest, in fact, had to correct them. It was Dennis Ross, who's in charge of the Middle East peace talks. They were just bubble-headed questions. So I can only imagine what it must be like when they're also venturing into foreign affairs and talking about what the United States should do in Zaire, what the United States should do in Northern Ireland.
On a score of 1 to 10, will there be peace in the Middle East by June? On a score of 1 to 10,
right. Not to mention the McLaughlin group, which consists of people yelling at each other and who can scream the loudest. And it's really outrageous. And I think it's one reason why Americans don't have a high regard for journalists, why we're bottom feeding down there on every opinion poll with lawyers and used car salesmen. I'm not saying we didn't earn it, including print journalists on our own, long before there were these talk shows.
Well, look at Joe Klein. I mean, a guy who writes a book.
Yeah.
Did he go anyplace? No, he went upstairs and he got another job. And he said, well yeah.
But nobody said anything about his work as a columnist as being
But we're talking about the character of the person. This guy influences a lot of people.
Yeah, I would dismiss that more as an error of I mean, there was definitely a character flaw in there. I'm not saying no. I had a bigger problem with Newsweek, by the way, which he was working for at the time, whose editor knew that he was anonymous, and not only kept it hidden, which is fine, a deal's a deal, but allowed several items to appear in the paper speculating on who it may be, none of which included Joe Klein. Now that was perpetrating a fraud. So my problem, frankly, was more with Newsweek than it was with Klein for wanting to keep this gig going.
You're right.
So.
All right, let's cross the terrain and
go. Going back.
Did you ever meet Bibi Netanyahu?
Oh, sure.
What do you think?
But not since he's been prime minister.
Did his character change?
Character doesn't change.
What, in your opinion, and I know you haven't been there, it's only what you read in the great New York Times and maybe some
other places. Yeah.
What is your sense of where Israel's going today?
I don't think it's going on the right road. I don't think that's going to come as a great shock to many of your viewers who've read me. I think he's made some some tactical mistakes, and part of the problem is I don't think he has a grand strategy. I don't think he knows where he's headed, and this is obviously a great failing. So Bibi's failing on the part of many within his own party. This is not, a Haberman original point of view by any means, is that he thinks tactically and not strategically, and that he goes from point to point, from issue to issue, crisis to crisis, trying to figure out how he can emerge looking best from it, and that it's a short-term way of thinking instead of a broader long-range goal. Whether you agree with Shimon Peres's long-range goals or not, he had them. And I don't think Netanyahu does, and this is a severe problem. And the result is he's not terribly popular with any reasonable constituency. The peaceniks are not going to like him because he's still a Likudnik and a...
And Likudniks don't like him because he betrayed them.
Because he betrayed them. The settlers don't like him because he talks about expanding settlements but doesn't allow it to happen. I just saw a picture yesterday of the police yanking people out of mobile homes set up. This sort of the usual first step in Israel for a new settlement, a mobile or an expanded settlement, mobile homes, caravans they're called there. And so who likes him? The religious like him from a political point of view.
Which brings us to a very interesting point. Were you there, Clyde, when they passed the law of direct election, or were you out of the country?
Yes. No, I covered that.
And what did you think at that time?
I didn't realize how bad a deal it could be. I thought at first that it was okay only from the sense of they needed some shake-up, that the existing system was very, very bad. The real reform that Israel needs is to raise the threshold of entry into parliament to some reasonable Europe style, 4%, 5%, whatever, instead of the 1.5% it is now. And shake out the parties and have not a two-party system, but maybe a reasonable 3 or 4 party system. That didn't happen. Where I was wrong, and where I began to realize, though, through other people showing me the errors in my way, even while I was there, why this was no good, was that the direct election of the prime minister, who then doesn't appoint his own cabinet independently, who then needs Knesset approval, so therefore he still has to go through all the coalition rigmarole that any of his predecessors did, that the small parties, usually the religious parties, but not exclusively, had a veto power over the system twice.
Now it's Charney.
First before the election for their endorsement for the direct election of the prime minister, then afterwards for the formation of his cabinet. What none of us, I think, foresaw, very few of us, I'm sure there must be some wise people out there who saw it, I certainly didn't, was that it would allow Israelis to split their vote. They could vote their the way they feel on the overriding issue of peace and security, basically meaning labor really could, and then vote their self-interest.
A lot of people did that, and I'll tell you where they voted. It'll surprise you. A lot of them voted for Shimon Peres and the Mavdal, the religious party, or vice versa.
But usually vice versa, and voted for Bibi, and then voted for Sharansky's party on elections, or voted for Shas or Kahalani, or for whatever reason. So you could get both, and that's what I'm saying. What's wrong with the system? Not because it elected Netanyahu. That's I think it's pretty clear that maybe it's not so clear, but Peres could very well be the prime minister now under the old system. But
100%. It was told to me by very senior people.
But it's more than likely. But I'm not saying it's bad because it elected Bibi Netanyahu. No, an election's an election, and fair is fair. But it's unhealthy to the way it's worked out, that people now, it's a hybrid system that is neither parliamentary and neither presidential. Netanyahu's mistake, one of them, is to think that also, another reason he has a popularity problem is that he went in thinking he's going to be an American-style president. And he's going to have his own National Security Council and his own appointees, all of whom are foreigners, by the way, American-born to a large degree. And while good people, perhaps, and knowledgeable, do seem to not fully understand certain Israeli ways, even though they've been there for decades. But it's very strange. But he thought he could impose a cabinet on Parliament, and he can't. He is a prime minister, not a president, which means that he's a minister like everybody else, first among equals.
The problem, and you're right, you're on target, and the real problem there is that unless 61 members of Knesset say we don't like you and we're willing to run again for an election, these people are going to sit with him. And the concept was that no one wanted to go for re-election. Guy Jacoby was on this show, as a former ambassador, and he wrote part of that law, and he says, you know, no one's going to want to run again. Well, it's true. Or it takes 80 to impeach him, which is highly unlikely.
Almost impossible.
So your country is stagnated, your economy is down. Passover, which is, you know, torrentially full with tourists, was 65% of tourists.
Was it? I didn't realize
it was terrible. Stock market is down. People are nervous, and no one's getting together.
No, it's a problem. All that having been said, I still remain relatively optimistic in the long run, whether under Netanyahu or beyond, that on the Israeli-Palestinian front, some form of further agreements will happen. Now, I know a lot of people say that's no reason to be optimistic, that this is a terrible thing. I have never shared that view. I feel that the logic that created the Oslo Agreements of 1993, and that I think was a great step forward, basically because these two peoples finally said we have to live together, we have to recognize each other's validity, and begin to figure out how we divide this table, this country is about the size of this table, in some sensible way. Obviously it was going to be difficult, obviously it was going to have a lot of serious bumps on the road, not the least of which these horrific and totally unacceptable bus bombings. But there was the logic that brought us to that famous handshake on the White House lawn, to me still holds.
Well, Clyde, I'm going to shock you with a fact today, and it's probably going to stun you. It's May 8th, we're taping, a week ahead. It's the 1-year anniversary of the PLO agreeing to knock out the covenant against the destruction of Israel.
You're telling me they haven't done it? And this is going to knock me off my seat?
No, I'm telling you that they haven't done it.
I'm sure they haven't done it.
And one of my personal criticisms of the Oslo Agreement was I thought Yitzhak Rabin should have sat down with Arafat and said, look, I recognize you, recognize me, and then let's go talk. And not give these little dwindles around so that Arafat can quibble around. In fact, he went to Gaddafi, Arafat, and said, you know, we never really knocked out this covenant. And there are people in Israel that monitor this day in and day out.
And are correctly angry about it.
Very angry.
And say this is his true intentions. The fact is that Arafat speaks out of at least both sides of his mouth, many more. And so at this point to say, which is the real version? There is a tendency on the part of those on the right to say that the Arafat that speaks hawkishly is the real Arafat, not the Arafat now who's come to a more pragmatic terms. Arafat did not become a Zionist. We know that. This is not the issue, but it seems to me that nothing has changed the pragmatic approach of we have to figure it out, which is the other reason why Rabin and company went to agree with him, not because they suddenly became great believers in Palestinian self-determination, to use that favorite Palestinian term, but because they felt this was in Israel's long-term interest. And until they came to terms with the Palestinians, and by further extension, the circle of Arab countries around them, they could not forestall the much bigger threats that Rabin saw coming from places like Iran and Iraq, temporarily defanged, but never permanently, as we can see. And that was the real issue to deal with. But you couldn't do it. Couldn't contain them unless you came to terms with your neighbors, and that first and foremost includes the Palestinians.
All right, we can accept that there are real problems with the Palestinians, but the Jordanians were in very good shape with Israel for the last year. Today there's another strain with the Jordanians. The Crown Prince of Jordan was supposed to come to a memorial service, and he didn't come.
This was for the girls.
For the girls.
Who were killed.
Now you said something during our time out,
Right.
which was very poignant about what King Hussein did, which was really well accepted in Israel.
It was an extraordinary
visiting
gesture.
the families, and you said it's somewhat like the Japanese do when they make a mistake. And this king really came forward, and it was something very strong to the people of Israel. And you know how tenuous those feelings are
Sure.
in Israel and how emotional they are.
No, the Israelis are, and the Jordanians, for the king to do a lot of these things is very courageous, and I know Israelis understand that. I think a lot of Americans don't quite understand it. To be honest, I didn't either. As one who was reasonably hawkish, in fact quite hawkish personally during the Gulf War, I was bothered by the king's, obviously, pro-Saddam leanings and alignment with Saddam, basically. Right. He went with, he wasn't going to anger this big guy next to him. Right. And I held that feelings until I went to Jordan, which was during the war, and suddenly realized I had a lot more sympathy. Another reason why you travel. Again, going back to the Giuliani thing, you understand other people's points of view. You have to climb in their shoes once in a while. This guy has, to use an Arabic word, serious sorrows, with a population that's well over half Palestinian. He cannot, and whose population supported Saddam enthusiastically. The king has a very shaky hold.
Absolutely.
And so
70% is Palestinian.
The king needs great understanding and hand-holding by everybody. And I feel that, and what I'm saying is his peace agreement with Israel was really between him and the Israelis. It has not seeped down very deeply, if at all, into the Jordanian population as a whole.
You don't know how right you are, because when that agreement took place, I took my camera, my people with a camera. I went downtown in Jordan.
Oh, yeah,
no, in Amman,
yeah.
And I did street interviews, as you would say, and the people were upset. They were very upset.
So the courage that he has shown on several occasions, not the least of which is the peace treaty of '94, and then gestures like this, probably deserve grand gestures on Israel's part too. It would have been a perfect time for Netanyahu, for example, to suspend in some way the Har Homa construction as a grand, not for Arafat, not for
it's a gesture to the Arab world.
As a grand gesture to the Arab world through the king, who is going to experience great discomfort, to put it mildly, through this. Now, I recognize that Netanyahu had his own political problems. He has his right-wing constituency to deal with, plus his own feelings. We always put these in terms of raw politics. Oh, I have a constituency to pacify. He has his own...
All right, we got 30 seconds, Clyde. A year from now, things will be easier, in your opinion?
Oh,
you can't guess.
My one strength as a political forecaster is to be wrong a day or two ahead of most people.
I'll make a forecast.
All right.
You won't appear on the McLaughlin show.
Oh, that's easy.
Thanks for coming on.
Get best-selling author Leon Charney's latest book, The Battle of the Two Talmuds. Join Charney as he explores years of Jewish history to find out why and how Talmudic scholars and rabbis abandoned the Holy Land for the lands of the diaspora. Learn about the power struggles behind the creation of the Jerusalem and Babylonian Talmuds. It's a book critics call engaging and enlightening. A book which will be of interest to people of every faith. Now available at Amazon and Barnes & Noble, or download the audiobook of The Battle of the Two Talmuds at iTunes or audible.com. Leon Charney sets out to discover the true meaning of the Kaddish, the Jewish custom of reciting a prayer to commemorate the death of a close relative. Join Charney as he finds out the history of the Kaddish and how it has evolved. Reviewed as a refreshing walk through Jewish history and a book that deserves to be read by both Jews and non-Jews, The Mystery of the Kaddish is now available online at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all other retailers and booksellers. Or download the audiobook at audible.com or on iTunes. Discover The Mystery of the Kaddish.
We have a tough show today, because we're going to talk about Israel with Moshe Rivlin, who's the world chairman of the Jewish National Fund and maybe has another name. Moshe, welcome to the show.
Thanks, welcome.
So let's talk about Jewish National Fund for a minute. There's been a lot of headlines, maybe you don't see them in Israel, about the fact that the new Jewish National Fund has, let's say, been gone through a very strict audit. Is that a good term?
First of all, it's a correct term.
Okay, thank God.
I'll tell you, first of all, I would love to tell you the story of the JNF of Keren Kayemet in Israel,
Okay.
to tell you the story what we are doing in the Negev, what's being done in the Galil on the border of Lebanon. But I don't want to avoid the question that you raised about
a lot of Americans who are involved in Jewish National Fund, it's a huge organization in this country, have read stories about the fact that when they thought they were giving money to the Jewish National Fund to go to Israel to plant trees, to bring forests, etc., the money was funded in different areas.
Let me put it that way. If you come to Israel, you will see that all the trees which Jews in the United States did buy and paid for are being planted. We are planting about 3 to 4 million trees per year. All the trees are being planted. If Jews gave money for water reservoirs, for breaking through roads, for land reclamation, for pushing the desert, if you go to Israel, you think that is being done. And nobody can doubt it, because those are facts that you can come every day and see it with your own eyes. And I'll say a few words later about that. But let's talk about the situation in the United States. About 10 or 15 years ago, we faced a situation where in Israel, the Keren Kayemet, besides deforestation, went to differently directions to investments that we didn't know before in all parts of Israel. And here the conception was the tree, the blue box, and people here rightly so thought that the time has come to bring the full story of Keren Kayemet, to bring it up to a new stage that people will understand what is the role of Keren Kayemet. Not only in the United States, but especially in the United States. If you want to do such a thing, you have to invest money. You have to open offices. You have to tell the story. You know what it costs. A man gives you for a tree. You send him a letter to plant the tree. You send him a receipt, and then you send him a certificate. When you finished up with that, you will see that $4 to $5 of the 10 that is given is because of that. Now, I would love to see him having a certificate. That's an educational tool. Because if a Jew knows, or a non-Jew, that when he's planting a tree in Israel, he's getting a certificate, he can show to his kids, he can show to his grandchildren, he can put it on the wall, he has a tree in Israel, that's part of education, that's part of identification, that's part of doing it. All that costs money. The problem was, when you invest in something, when do you come back and say, let us audit our books. So much for investment. Now let's see what we have to do. And about a year and a half ago, that decision was taken. And we had a special panel. I think that nobody could have really take more important, more dignified Jewish leaders like Jack Stein, like Joe Metz, like Israel Miller, like a lady judge. They were sitting for months overlooking whatever it was. They had an audit firm to look in. And they say no misuse of funds, no fraud. But they say when you speak about Zionist educational programs, when you say about all this, please, the people who gave you the money were not aware of that. They were not told that that's what they're going to do. And I think that they were right on that.
Who was right?
The critics who say, why didn't you tell the people? Because if somebody gives the money, he has to know the full story.
Right.
But they can really be assured, and they were assured by the panel and by the audits, no fraud and no misuse of funds. Now, if you take what happened since, they built up a task force to restructure the organization, to downsize the organization, that less and less money will be spent and more money will be sent in Israel. By the way, Monday, May 12th, you will have all the committees and subcommittees of the task force meeting in New York, submitting their report, and then to have an implementation committee to go into that. But what's important to know is that we didn't wait for the results of the committee. We started to work. From November till now, they cut 15% in the salaries, 10% in all the other cost and expenditure. They saved already close to $2 million. That's only the beginning. That's only the beginning. I think that after the meeting on Monday, it may take another 4 to 8 weeks. You will have all kinds of steps, regulations, closing offices, merging offices, less regions, much less expenses, much more involvement of the lay people, and people will know exactly what's happening. As you know, a new president was elected, Ronald Lauder. That I don't have to tell the people in the United States who Ronald Lauder is. All the things that he's involved in. I just went over the list today. I don't know of any Jewish organization that is not involved, but I would like especially to mention the wonderful work the Lauder Foundation is doing to restore Jewish life in Eastern Europe.
Yeah, we know about that.
No, but that's the kind of demand that he took over and he's doing on that. And he is now watching almost every step. In the same day after the meeting of the task force, there will be another meeting because the main campaign will be the campaign for the Negev or the Negev Action Plan. Please remember, the Negev, the desert is 60% of the land of Israel. We started to build in the Negev 54 years ago, before statehood, with the first 3 settlements. That plan is dealing with 100 settlements. You go today in the Negev, you will see things that even for me, yesterday they were a dream. To go to Revivim, which is the first settlement in the Negev, and to see olive trees grow there, and to go 10 minutes from there in Mashabei Sadeh, and to see the fish ponds there, and to see in the Psor area, overlooking the Gaza Strip, all the water reservoirs, which is enabling us to grow citrus fruit, greenery. You go wherever you go in the Negev.
Moshe, no one questions the reliability of the Jewish National Fund as an organization in Israel. And what is the connection between Keren Kayemet in Israel and New York, let's say, or the United States? Are you the umbrella organization?
No, let me say it in that way. Keren Kayemet in Israel surely is in charge of implementing all the plans that I just mentioned. That we are working through Jewish organizations set up in 34 countries in the world. They are autonomous. They are working in their own way. They also have to work according to American law or Canadian law or British law. We are their agent to take the money which is raised here and to implement it in Israel.
So you're not an umbrella over all JNF in the world?
We are and we are not, because we have all kind of things. We are the recipients, like we have it with the UJA and the Jewish Agency. It's the same kind of arrangement.
But Israel has no responsibility for the United States. Is that correct or incorrect?
Officially and formally not.
Okay.
But morally, sure, yes. Officially and formally not. But if I have to work with the money that I'm receiving from the United States, sure enough, I would like to see more and more and more money sent to the United States. I would like to tell you, very interesting, in November at the conference after the audit political, a plan was put on the table to make sure that 50% of the money will go to the United States. In the report that you will hear on Monday, they are speaking already about 70 to 80%. 70 to 80%
All right, let me ask you a question. Were you personally upset by what happened here? Obviously you didn't know because it's not your business.
First of all, everybody was upset or not upset. Sure, I was upset that less money was received in Israel. Sure, I was upset about the percentage. But I knew what then the audit really told us and what the panel really told us. And for me, it was a source of relief that there was no fraud and no misuse. But I was very sorry that so much money was spent here and so little came to Israel. And I think that I must say, I don't know of other organizations that they took on their own initiative such courageous steps. First of all, that you have an independent committee or panel to look into that,
Right.
and then to implement it.
But in a sense, to question you about it is unfair because you have no legal responsibility for this.
First of all, I think it's very fair because I'm the world chairman, and as the world chairman, for good or for bad, I say I'm part of it. Even I can say formally not or what, and I'm not a man to escape responsibility. And I am here, as I was here in November and I was before, to help all the forces who are ready to come together and help us to move to another avenue, an avenue of really implementing all those sources.
All right, let me ask you a question. Is there a purpose for the Jewish National Fund to collect money other than to give it to Israel and for paying for office expenses here? Should they be funding programs in the United States, or should all that money be going to Israel?
When you ask the question, it looks so easy. But when you look on one of the programs, people can claim that when that was done, that was an investment to bring Jews to understand what the JNF is and why we want them to bring money. I would like to point out one thing. If you come today to raise money for a university or for an hospital, you don't have to explain what is a university, you don't have to explain what's an hospital. If you come to collect money for the UJA, that's to help Israel. Everybody understands. In
Right.
peacetime, in wartime, immigrants are coming.
Right.
When you come to explain to a generation of today, not your generation,
I thought I'm young, Moshe.
but even you are young, but there are other generations behind you.
The puberty generation.
You are wonderful, you are young, but since there are people that they grow
I
up and they
understand.
don't
So you
know the
say
story,
as an
when
educational process.
When you come to them, they didn't hear, not in school, not at home, that there is a place, land reclamation, land redemption, you have to pay for it, that's a national obligation. You can get the ear of the man for 7 to 8 minutes. And you have to explain to him things that he didn't hear before. That investment was part of building up that base. It maybe should have been controlled better. It maybe should have been curtailed better. Those are the steps that we are now taking. Those are the things. So let us make clear two things. Nobody is questioning the importance of the work that we are doing in Israel. Nobody is questioning the fact that in the last 4 years, the budget and the work and the activities of the JNF tripled from the border of Lebanon to the border with Egypt. Nobody can deny the fact that we went into new adventures and new avenues of activities, mainly with water and around water. That today we can speak about entirely different Negev and entirely different Galil because of those plans. Nobody can deny that we are today heading the steering committees, leading the forces, being the first of the field to do what we are doing to change. Nobody can deny that to do that you need the cooperation of the Jewish people. Or to get to the Jewish people, or to introduce the story to the Jewish people, it's much more difficult today than it was in your time, even you are still so young.
But you got no
Or
big
it wasn't
problem.
my
Moshe,
time.
you touched a very big problem. Who are Jews today? That's a problem. That's not JNF's problem, by the way.
First of all, it's not JNF's problem. Sure, it's not a problem with me. For me, everybody, thank God, is a Jew. If he feels as a Jew, he behaves as a Jew, and he wants to see his kids raised as Jews, he is a good Jew for me, and I will be the last one to say whatever the nonsense is being said.
So,
recently.
if you were in a Knesset today, would you vote for that bill that's being proposed with the Orthodox Shas Party, which says that conservative Reform Jews should not be accepted in Israel?
First of all, I'm not sure that that's exactly what the law said. If you ask for me, I wouldn't vote for that. But that's not a problem. You have to ask yourself a very simple question. The people now saying they're all for the status quo. Was it wise? Was it wise on behalf of the reform to go to the Supreme Court?
In Israel, in Israel.
In Israel.
Right. A lot of people don't know about that.
Yeah, they went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said the Knesset can change, then you brought it to the Knesset. And you go to the Supreme Court, the status quo would have remained the state in the same time. It's a complicated question. But beyond that question of procedure and how doing it, the unity of the Jewish people is so important nowadays that all those laws and introduction are bringing to such a diversion, to such a split, which is terrible when Israel is facing so much problems. But in the same time, I'm really sorry for those who pushed the case and went to the Supreme Court, and then it came back to the Knesset with all the boomerang that it was.
Moshe, we're out of time. I'm glad you came on because most people don't understand it. I think you explained it very well.
And I must admit again, after next week, it means after the task force and the meeting, you will hear more about all the steps to safeguard here that most of the money, to 70 to 80% will go to Israel. And again, I'm inviting all the Jews to come to Israel, to see with their own eyes.
Even non-Jews could come and plant trees.
They are coming,
So
they are planting
why limit it
trees.
to Jews?
You should see secretaries of state, ministers, heads of state. May I finish up with the story?
Sure.
Giscard d'Estaing, who was president of France, wasn't known as the best friend of the Jewish people in Israel. But he came to Israel, and in Israel there is a place where you have a monument with 80,000 names. 80,000 names of French Jews who were sent by the Nazis to their death, and that is backed by 80,000 trees. And when there is a dignitary coming from France, he's planting a tree there. And one of them was Giscard d'Estaing. I was with him, he was with his wife. He did plant the tree. I didn't feel that he was really full of emotion. A year later, he was no more president. His friend John Friedman called me up and said, you know the president is coming to Israel to visit. I said, yes, I hear. He insists that he wants to come and water his tree. In the beginning, I was sure it's a joke. He came and watered his tree, and you should see him. You should see when Kissinger planted a tree, and his son read the prayer for the planting, and Kissinger was in tears on his eye.
Well, I believe it. These people are human.
These people, and you have to scan with your own eyes and see it. And believe me, with you, with the help of others, we will be able to tell the story. And the desert of the Negev will become a blooming garden.
All right, Moshe. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks.
Next time you're in town, let us know you're back.